My name is Piper Lawson, and I thought my wedding day in Reno would be the happiest day of my life. The music had slowed, the lights had softened, and every face in the crowd looked warm and kind. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, my family had finally learned how to love me right. Then my sister took the microphone. She smiled like she owned the room, and for a second I believed she would say something sweet, something about growing up together or how proud she was of me. Instead, she laughed and said, "You know, Piper once got kicked out of the house for being too stubborn to listen." A ripple of awkward laughter rolled across the hall. Glasses clinked, forks froze midair. My chest tightened. I felt every eye shift toward me, waiting to see if I'd laugh too. Colton reached for my hand under the table, his thumb tracing small circles against my palm. Then she added, "Relax, everyone. It's just a joke." No one laughed. The band didn't start again. For a few long seconds, even the air seemed to hold its breath. I forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending I hadn't just been stripped bare in front of everyone I loved. Has someone ever turned your happiest moment into your deepest shame? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you handled it. The morning after the wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I thought it was the usual congratulations messages from guests, still replaying last night's joy. But as soon as I unlocked my screen, I froze. Notifications flooded every app I had. Someone had recorded my sister's speech, the speech, and posted it online. Within hours, it had gone viral. The caption read, "When your sister turns your wedding into a roast." I stared at it for a long time, hoping it was some cruel mistake. It wasn't. The video had over 100,000 views, with comments multiplying by the minute. I clicked one. "That's hilarious." Another said, "She probably deserved it." Some even tagged their siblings, joking they'd do the same. I felt my stomach twist. Every word cut deeper than the last. They were laughing at me, strangers turning my humiliation into their morning entertainment. My best friend Nina texted first. "Is that your sister? What the hell happened?" I stared at the screen, unable to reply. I didn't even know what to say. How could I explain that Sienna had done this before, not in front of hundreds of people, but in smaller, quieter ways? It had always been her nature to get the spotlight, to make me the punchline. The phone rang again. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was calm, overly calm. "Sweetheart, don't let this get to you. You know Sienna didn't mean to hurt you. She was joking. People just took it the wrong way." I gripped the phone tighter. "Mom." "She humiliated me," I said quietly, but she didn't seem to hear. "Please, Piper, don't make this a family issue. It'll blow over soon." Dad took the phone next. "You know your sister," he said, using that same patient tone he always used when Sienna caused trouble. "She's impulsive. You've always been more sensitive. Don't let a few words ruin the peace." Peace. That word again. For them, peace meant pretending nothing happened. For me, it meant swallowing pain so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Around noon, a new message appeared. It was from Sienna. "People can't take a joke. You need to lighten up." I stared at it for a full minute before locking my phone. That was it. No apology, no remorse, not even a trace of self-awareness. Just her voice, as careless as ever. I used to think she didn't mean to hurt me, that she just didn't know any better. But now, reading those words, I realized she knew exactly what she was doing. Colton walked in with 2 mugs of coffee, his hair still messy from sleep. "You're up early," he said softly, setting one mug beside me. He glanced at my face and frowned. "Did she text you?" I handed him the phone without saying a word. His eyes scanned the message and his jaw tightened. "You don't owe her a response," he said quietly. "Let her deal with the silence for once." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to let go of the phone. The silence felt too heavy, too final. My notifications kept lighting up: comments, mentions, private messages from people I barely knew. That joke was savage. Sisters can be brutal. This is gold. They were laughing again, and I was right back at that moment, standing in front of everyone trying not to cry while pretending it didn't hurt. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. I kept thinking about her face when she grabbed the microphone, how proud she looked of herself, how she laughed when no one else did. I couldn't stop wondering whether she felt any shame now that the world had joined in. By 3 in the morning, I scrolled through the comments again, almost like I wanted to punish myself. Each one chipped away at what was left of my dignity. Legendary maid of honor moment. That bride's reaction is priceless. My hands trembled. I put the phone down and buried my face in the pillow. Colton's arm slid around me as he murmured, half asleep, "It'll pass, Piper. Don't let them win." But it didn't feel like something that could just pass. The laughter might fade. The comments might stop. But the echo of her voice, that cruel, confident tone, kept playing in my head. Everyone had laughed at the joke, but the joke had been me. And no matter how many days passed, the truth wasn't going anywhere. By Wednesday, karma finally found its way. The video that had humiliated me reached the wrong screen, or maybe the right one. Randall Myers, the regional director at the PR agency where my sister worked, watched it during his morning coffee. He was known for his composure, a man who believed that reputation was everything, especially in public relations. When he saw Sienna laughing at her own cruel joke, his expression reportedly hardened. A junior employee who overheard him later told a friend, his face just went cold. Within an hour, an internal email went out, mandatory staff meeting at 2 p.m. At the agency, whispers spread fast. Some employees had already seen the clip but hadn't connected the woman in the wedding dress to their colleague. Now everyone knew. Sienna, who always prided herself on being poised and articulate, arrived at the meeting pale but defiant. She carried her phone in one hand, pretending to scroll, trying to look unfazed. Randall entered the room carrying a printed copy of the company's code of conduct. He didn't raise his voice. "When you represent this firm," he said evenly, "you represent respect, integrity, and empathy." What I saw online was none of those. Sienna lifted her chin. "It was just a joke, sir. Between sisters. It got taken out of context." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying nerves. Randall looked at her silent for a moment, then said, "Humor without respect isn't humor, Sienna. It's cruelty, dressed as charm." The room went still. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Randall continued, "We work in public relations. Every word we say, every image we post reflects who we are. If we can't treat our own families with decency, how can clients trust us with their public image?" By the end of the meeting, Sienna had been asked to step outside. HR joined, and within an hour, she was officially terminated. No scene, no argument. Just quiet resignation as she gathered her things, ignoring the glances of her coworkers. Someone later said she looked like she might cry, though she kept her chin up the entire time. That afternoon, I received a call from Nina. Her voice carried that mix of disbelief and pity. "Piper, did you hear Sienna got fired? My cousin works with one of her coworkers." I didn't speak for a moment. My mind felt blank, like it couldn't process the words. "Are you serious?" I finally asked. "Yeah," Nina said. Apparently, her boss said she crossed a line, something about how a PR manager should never mock family online. I hung up and sat in silence for a long while, staring out the window at the street below. Colton came in with a basket of laundry and noticed my expression. "What happened?" he asked gently. I hesitated. "She lost her job." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Because of the video," I nodded. "Randall saw it. Fired her this afternoon." Colton set the basket down, his tone careful. "How do you feel about that?" I didn't know. There was no satisfaction, at least not the way I'd imagined it. I thought I'd feel vindicated, maybe even happy that karma had done its work. But what I felt instead was a quiet ache, a mix of sadness and relief. Sienna had brought this upon herself, yet a part of me mourned what we had lost long before this. A bond that should have been unbreakable had turned into something sharp and distant. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from my mother. "Your sister's devastated. She needs your support right now." I read the words twice. There was no mention of how devastated I had been, no acknowledgement of what she had done to me. Only another reminder that I was expected to be the bigger person. I put the phone face down on the table. For the first time in days, the air in the apartment felt lighter. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because the balance had finally shifted. The world had seen what I had always known, that words have consequences, even when they're spoken with a smile. That night, as I lay in bed, I wondered if Sienna was staring at her own ceiling, replaying everything like I once had. Maybe she was realizing that jokes can echo longer than intended. Or maybe she was still blaming me, telling herself I couldn't take a joke. Either way, karma had spoken louder than I ever could. By Friday night, her name kept flashing on my phone again and again. I had ignored the first few calls, thinking she would stop eventually, but Sienna didn't. It was past 10 when I finally answered, more out of exhaustion than curiosity. Her voice came through the speaker, thick with tears. "Piper, please, I need you to talk to Randall. Tell him it wasn't serious. Say you asked me to make that speech." The desperation in her tone was sharp, the same voice she used when she wanted something as a child. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Then she added, "You know how hard I worked for that job. Please just help me fix this." I took a slow breath before answering. "You made your choice, Sienna. You thought it was funny. You didn't care how it made me feel." The other end went silent except for a quiet sniff. "So that's it," she said, her voice breaking. "You're really going to let me lose everything?" I didn't reply. There were 100 things I could have said, but none of them would have changed the truth. I simply hung up. The silence after that felt heavier than her voice. For a few minutes, I just sat on the couch, phone still in my hand, heart pounding. Then the screen lit up again. "Mom?" I let it ring, but she called back immediately. This time I answered. Her tone was not gentle. "Piper, your sister is devastated. You need to stop being so stubborn and talk to her boss. Do it for the family." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I'm not lying for her. She did this herself." There was a sharp exhale on the other end, followed by that familiar tremor of anger. "You've always been cold to her. Ever since you were little, you just couldn't let things go. I'm asking you for once to forgive." I wanted to laugh at the word forgive. It sounded so easy for people who never had to live with the consequences. Dad's voice came next, calmer but still full of quiet disappointment. "Piper, you've made your point. She's your sister. You don't kick family when they're down. Be the bigger person." I stared out the window while he spoke, watching the city lights blink across the skyline. "I've been the bigger person my whole life," I said softly, "and it's never been enough." Before he could reply, I ended the call. The phone kept ringing for a while longer. I didn't pick up again. Instead, I stepped out onto the small balcony. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Below, the streetlights were beginning to go out one by one, leaving the city wrapped in quiet shadows. I sat on the wooden chair Colton had built for me last summer and finally let my shoulders relax. A moment later, I felt him behind me. He didn't ask what happened. He just placed a light blanket over my shoulders and sat beside me. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Peace isn't selfish, Piper." His words settled in the air like a truth I had been avoiding. I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching the last light flicker across the street. For years, I had believed that family peace meant silence, that forgiveness meant forgetting, and that love required endurance no matter how much it hurt. But in that moment, sitting there under the fading glow of the city, I realized it was never about a single joke or a cruel speech. It was about a lifetime of excuses, of being told to absorb the pain and smile anyway. The phone buzzed one more time inside the apartment, vibrating against the kitchen counter, but I didn't move. The night was finally still, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for choosing quiet over chaos. Back when I was 10, they sent me away, said I needed discipline. I remember the drive to Nevada vividly, the endless road stretching between us and what I used to call home. Mom said it was just for the summer, a chance for me to learn some manners and give them a break. I believed her, clutching my little backpack in the back seat. But when fall came, they didn't come to get me. They sent a check instead. My Aunt Marjorie Bennett lived on the edge of a small desert town outside Carson City. She was nothing like my parents. Where they were polished and impatient, she was gentle and deliberate. She moved through her days with a quiet rhythm, feeding the hens at dawn, hanging laundry beneath the open sky, humming while she cooked. Her house always smelled like cinnamon and soap. The first night I stayed there, she made chicken stew and apple pie, and when I asked where I should sleep, she pointed to a neatly made bed with yellow sheets. "Right here, sweetheart," she said. "You're home for as long as you need." For weeks, I kept expecting my parents to call, but the phone never rang. Instead, I got letters once a month, written more like progress reports than affection. "Your father and I hope you're being good for Aunt Marjorie." There was no warmth. "No, we miss you." I didn't know it then, but they hadn't sent me away because I needed discipline. They had sent me away because they were tired. Tired of a daughter who wasn't as charming as Sienna, who asked too many questions, who never seemed easy to love. Marjorie saw through it. She never said a bad word about them. But sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch the sadness in her eyes. She worried for me in a quiet, patient way. She taught me things no one had before: how to bake bread, how to patch a torn shirt, how to listen to silence without fearing it. She'd hand me a book in the evenings and sit across the table with her tea, while I read aloud. "Words will take you anywhere, Piper," she'd tell me, "even places that forget to want you." One afternoon, when I came home crying because some local kids teased me for being the girl nobody wanted, Marjorie knelt beside me and wiped my tears with her apron. "People who make fun of others are carrying emptiness," she said softly. "You don't have to carry it with them." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time, I understood that care didn't have to be loud to be real. Holidays were the hardest. On Christmas morning, I'd sit by the window and watch the mail truck crawl down the dusty road. There was always a card from my parents addressed neatly in my mother's handwriting inside a plain envelope with a crisp $20 bill. No phone call, no letter, no love. I'd pretend it didn't bother me, but Aunt Marjorie always knew. That evening, she'd set another place at the table, light a candle, and say, "You and I, we make our own family tonight." That phrase stayed with me long after I left Nevada. Even now, years later, when I think of that dusty kitchen and her warm voice, it echoes like a promise. "You'll make your own family someday." I didn't understand it then, but she was teaching me something powerful: that family isn't made of blood or obligation. It's made of kindness, of people who choose you even when others don't. When she passed away during my college years, I drove back to that little house in the desert. The yellow sheets were still folded neatly in the closet, the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon, and her favorite teacup sat by the window as if waiting. I sat there for a long time, feeling both orphaned and anchored. She had given me something my parents never did: a sense that I was enough even when I wasn't perfect. Now, as an adult, every time I stand up for myself, every time I refuse to be quiet for the sake of keeping peace, I hear her voice again. Not as a whisper of the past, but as a reminder that love, the real kind, doesn't shame or silence you. It stays even when everyone else leaves. 2 weeks later, Mom called and said we should have dinner in Reno. Her voice sounded too cheerful, the kind of tone she used when pretending everything was fine. Colton glanced at me as I hung up, his brow lifting slightly. "Do you think it's a peace offering?" he asked. I shrugged. "I guess we'll find out." We drove into the city at sunset, the sky painted in warm gold and lavender. I wanted to believe it would be a step toward healing, but deep down, a familiar weight sat in my chest. The restaurant was one of those places my parents loved: white tablecloths, crystal glasses, waiters who spoke softly. When we arrived, they were already there. Mom waved eagerly, her pearls gleaming under the light. Dad stood up, shaking Colton's hand, while Sienna sat beside them, her eyes swollen from crying. She managed a faint smile when she saw me, and for a moment I thought maybe she was ready to take responsibility. The first few minutes were almost normal. The waiter brought wine, and Mom made small talk about the weather, the new house Colton and I had bought, even the color of the drapes. It felt rehearsed, like a script everyone knew but no one believed. Then, as the appetizers arrived, Mom leaned forward, her tone lowering. "Piper, your sister has been going through a terrible time. You know she didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at her but said nothing. Sienna wiped her eyes and whispered, "I lost everything, Piper. My job. My reputation. I can't even walk into a grocery store without people whispering." She paused, trying to catch my gaze. "If you could just talk to Randall. Tell him I was going through a breakdown or something. You have no idea how much this means to me." I put down my fork. "You're asking me to lie." She shook her head quickly. "No, just to help me fix what got twisted." Mom nodded in agreement. "Sweetheart, sometimes we all say things we regret. Isn't family about forgiveness?" For a moment I almost gave in. Old instincts surfaced, the urge to smooth things over, to keep the peace at my own expense. But then I looked at Sienna and something in me hardened. I thought of the 10-year-old girl they sent away, of the birthdays spent without a call, of Aunt Marjorie lighting a candle at an empty table so I wouldn't feel forgotten. I set my napkin down carefully and looked at each of them. "You want to talk about forgiveness? Let's start with memory." My voice stayed calm, but the words came heavy. "When I was 10, you told me I needed discipline. What I really needed was love. You sent me away because it was easier than raising a daughter who didn't fit your image. You didn't call, didn't visit, just mailed cash, and called it care." The table went silent. Mom's lips parted, but no sound came. Sienna's face crumpled. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You don't understand what it was like for me." I met her eyes. "You laughed at my pain, Sienna. You stood at my wedding and made my childhood a punchline. Now you want me to rescue you from the consequences of that." She covered her face with her hands, trembling. "I just wanted to make people laugh," she said through tears. I didn't flinch. "You made everyone uncomfortable. You made me feel 10 years old again, small, ashamed, invisible." Dad finally spoke, his voice rough. "Piper, we came here to move forward, not dig up the past." I turned toward him. "The past never buried itself, Dad. You just stopped looking at it." The waiter appeared quietly, unsure whether to refill our glasses. Colton shook his head, signaling him away. He reached for the check before my father could and placed his card on the tray. Then he stood, pulling out my chair. "We're done here," he said softly. I rose, smoothing my dress, my pulse steady for the first time that evening. As we walked away, I glanced back at the table. The plates were untouched, the food already cooling, the conversation frozen midair. Mom stared at her folded napkin, Dad at the wine glass, and Sienna's shoulders shook silently. Outside, the night air hit me like a quiet release. Colton slipped his hand into mine. We didn't say a word as we walked to the car. Behind us, through the glass windows, the family I used to belong to sat in a silence they had built themselves. By the end of that month, the calls stopped completely. There were no emails, no texts, no accidental voicemails left in the middle of the night. Silence arrived like a guest who intended to stay. For the first few days, I kept checking my phone out of habit, half expecting an apology, half fearing another plea. But the screen stayed blank. Even the small blue notification light, which had once blinked relentlessly, seemed to have given up. A former coworker of Sienna's messaged me on social media one morning, saying she had heard that my sister moved back in with our parents. "She barely leaves the house," the message read. "Your mom brings her groceries. People in town talk, but not to her." I stared at the message for a while before closing the app. There was no satisfaction, only a quiet ache that I couldn't name. I imagined the house I grew up in, its sharp corners, the ticking clock in the hallway, the smell of disinfectant instead of home. I could picture her there, retreating behind drawn curtains, surrounded by the same silence I once knew too well. A week later, I received an email from Mr. Randall. It was short, formal, and strangely kind. He wrote that after careful review, the company had confirmed the decision regarding Sienna's dismissal. There will be no reversal, he wrote, but I hope she finds perspective and peace. I read the sentence twice. Perspective and peace. Two words that could build or break a person. Then one afternoon, a letter came addressed in my mother's handwriting. Colton found it in the mailbox and placed it on the kitchen counter without saying a word. The envelope was thin, the handwriting tight and slanted as if the pen had been pressed too hard. I opened it carefully. There were only a few lines. You have made this family look shameful. Whatever satisfaction you feel now will not last. Blood is not something you can erase. No love, Mom. No signature from Dad. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. It didn't hurt the way it might have years ago. It just felt final. That night, as Colton and I sat on the couch, he glanced at me quietly. You're really not going to reply. I shook my head. There's nothing left to say. I spent most of my life explaining myself to people who were never really listening. I think I'm finally done. He nodded, his expression soft, then reached for my hand. You finally look free. The words landed gently, like a truth I had waited too long to hear. We had been planning to move for months, but after that night I stopped hesitating. Within 3 weeks, we packed the apartment, sold the old furniture, and drove north to Portland. It wasn't an escape. It was a beginning. The city smelled like rain and pine. The air cooler, the streets lined with bookstores and cafes that felt alive in a way my hometown never did. On our first morning there, I woke to sunlight slipping through tall windows. The sound of traffic below was distant, like the hum of a new rhythm finding me. I started my new job at a community arts foundation the following Monday. The office was small but full of color paintings from local artists' shelves stacked with donated books. My colleagues were kind in a quiet, unforced way. During lunch, one of them asked where I was from, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain my family or my past. Nevada, I said simply, but I think I've finally found where I belong. In the evenings, Colton and I would walk along the river, our hands brushing as the city lights reflected on the water. Sometimes he'd ask how I was feeling, and I'd tell him the truth. Lighter, quieter, still learning what peace really means. Other times we didn't speak at all, just watched the sky fade from gold to indigo, content in the kind of silence that healed instead of hurt. One night as we stood by the bridge, I realized that silence no longer felt like punishment. It had become a border between who I was and who I refused to be again. The calls had stopped, yes, but so had the guilt. The ache in my chest was softer now, shaped into something almost tender. I thought of Aunt Marjorie's words still echoing after all these years. You'll make your own family someday. I smiled to myself because I finally had. 6 months after the wedding, peace finally felt like home. The chaos that had once followed me like a shadow was gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of a new life in Portland. Our apartment was small but bright, tucked above a bookstore that smelled of paper and rain. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, landing on the wooden floor in soft gold streaks. Colton would brew coffee while I set up my art table by the window, where a vase of daisies always stood. The city outside hummed gently alive but never overwhelming, and for the first time in years I felt the kind of stillness that didn't scare me. My online art classes had started to grow. What began as a few students watching my painting tutorials turned into hundreds signing up each month. People from everywhere wrote to say my lessons helped them feel calm or creative again. Their words filled the spaces that used to echo with judgment. I realized I had built something of my own, something that didn't depend on approval or lineage. I painted every afternoon until the light faded, then sat with Colton for dinner, laughing about small things, building our own version of family quiet and kind. One evening, as I checked my email after class, a familiar name appeared at the top of my inbox: Sienna. My chest tightened. The subject line was simple: I'm sorry. I hovered over it for a long time, staring at the two words as if they might shift into something deeper. Finally, I opened it. There was no long explanation, no excuses, just a single sentence: I never meant to hurt you. I was jealous. I hope you're happy. That was all. No greeting, no closing, only a hollow honesty that came too late. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Pity, relief. The anger that once burned so fiercely had already gone cold. I reread the line once more and closed the laptop. The apology wasn't mine to hold or reject anymore. I had already moved past it quietly in ways she would never understand. The next morning, I went for a walk alone. The air was crisp, and the trees along the park trail shimmered with the light of early summer. Children laughed in the distance, their joy ringing through the morning. I sat on a bench, thinking of Aunt Marjorie, and the words she had once told me when I was a child, hiding from a world that didn't seem to want me. Family is who shows up, not who demands forgiveness, not who shares your last name, but who stays, who listens, who chooses you, even when there's no obligation. When I came home, I opened the laptop again. The email from Sienna was still there, unread by anyone but me. I moved it to the trash without hesitation, then emptied the folder. Watching the message disappear gave me a strange sense of peace, as if I had finally unclenched a part of myself I didn't know was still holding on. That night after dinner, I stood by the shelf where our wedding photo sat. In it, Colton and I were laughing, unaware that the world around us would soon unravel and rebuild in a better shape. The glow in our faces wasn't about perfection, it was about choice. I touched the frame lightly and whispered, I built my own family. The words felt steady, like a vow fulfilled. As I turned off the lights and walked to bed, I realized that happiness no longer felt borrowed or conditional. It wasn't tied to old names or broken ties. It lived quietly in the morning sunlight, in the sound of brushes against canvas, in the laughter shared over late dinners. Peace, I had learned, wasn't something given. It was something made, protected, and chosen. Thank you for listening until the end. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear they're not alone. Your voice can make a difference. If this story touched you, like and share it to help others find their strength. And remember, self-respect is not selfish. It's the foundation of every kind of love worth keeping.